Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Elisabeth Brooke. And I am so delighted to have Elisabeth with me today because not for the first time, I am enjoying her marvelous, marvelous book, which is Traditional Western Herbal Medicine. And well, I can't even tell you what I love about this book because it's just everything. So, firstly, I love the fact that you talk about the philosophy of medicine, so different approaches to medicine going through the centuries, different approaches to the idea of whether astrology should be deterministic or be more of a co-creative process, which we're still debating now, but goes right back to ancient Greece, where they were arguing the same thing. So I love that. And of course, I love the actual information about the herbs. You've got this beautiful herbal section in it that talks about the herbs, the planets that go with them. So I love that. I love the section on this decumbiture. And of course, the very thing that I thought would be interesting for us to discuss today, which is the matter of temperament and how foods that we eat might actually be beneficial for certain temperaments. So you see so much in this amazing book, and it's not a thick one either. I mean, it's hefty, but it's not what you would expect for a book to hold so much to be like that. Oh, well. So I think I'll just hand things over to you and let you talk to us about temperament and what it is.
Okay, so there are four temperaments and they're related to the four elements. So the first element is earth, and that's related to the melancholic temperament. And the melancholic temperament, like the element earth, is heavy, sinking, serious, maybe a bit pessimistic, very slow moving, quite dense. And quite often the people with a melancholic temperament are people who work very hard. Service is very important to them. It's very important to them to feel useful. And they are people who quite often appear in my clinic from burnout and exhaustion, because one thing about earth is it imagines it can keep going longer than it really can. And the signs, obviously the earth signs that rule the element earth of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. So they have different aspects to them. But the melancholics are the people in life who do research, they're scientists, they're teachers, they're care workers, they are people who make things happen. It's like when things go wrong in your house, what you need is a melancholic who knows how to tighten screws and he knows how things work. Melancholics know how things work. And as a consequence, they're quite deep thinkers. And that's a positive and a negative, because a deep thinker obviously has intelligence, and usually they are intelligent people. But also a deep thinker can be quite pessimistic, because if you think too much about the world, especially from a certain perspective, it could be quite depressing. And they are glass half empty people, melancholics. They are pessimists. I don't know if they necessarily expect the worst, but they're not surprised by people's bad behavior. They can be cynical. They can be bitter sometimes if things don't work out well. But they're very serious, and that's a good thing. We need serious people in the world who make sure everything works properly, and they're very hot on ethics. They're honest people. What they say goes. Then they don't spin stories at all. And it's hard for a melancholic to be a child. They find childhood quite difficult because they're serious and they don't like noise and shouting and excitement and all the rest of it. They like things to be very measured, very controlled, and very peaceful. So they find childhood quite difficult. Although they're, usually good scholars, they study well, but the exuberance part of childhood they don't like. Definitely, as they grow older, life becomes easier because everyone catches up with them. people grow up and mature with them. And also people realize things about limitation, which a melancholic knows all about. Boundaries, limitation. And as you get older, you have to pace yourself. You realize you've learned certain lessons, you understand more about how the world works. So as they grow older, they are happier people. By way of contrast, fire, like the element, is very unstable, sudden, explosive, burning. Because earth will nourish, but fire burns. And once something is burned, it can't be reconstituted, it's destroyed. And there's a sense with fiery people that they can consume those people around them. They can, with their energy, with their enthusiasm, with their recklessness. So unlike the melancholic, choleric people, which is the element fire, very speedy, shouty, don't like to sit still. Those people that pace the room, you know, or their legs always going, they're really not very good at sitting still. You quite often find them as athletes, runners, yogi people, or clearly in the army, but anything that requires courage and energy, and it can be quite intolerant people and dismissive of people who are afraid. They don't really do gentle, subtle emotions. So they're not very good with feelings, but they're great if you need something done. And earth and fire work quite well together, because what fire has is the inspiration. It has the idea. It's like, let's do this, or let's do it that way. And earth comes along and works out how to do it, and goes through, well, we can't do that because this would happen. And okay, if you did that, well, then you'd need to do this as well. So earth kind of deconstructs things, whereas fire is the inspiration. You can go into a room and you can get everyone going and you can move things. So that's very exciting. But it's not very calm. They're not calm people at all. And they're often driven in a different way from melancholic people, are quite often driven to succeed and to build, but a choleric person is driven. Freedom is really important to them, and autonomy and agency. So it's about, well, this is what I want to do. This is my game. And they can be quite harsh on people who stand in their way. But fire, it's not that strong, even though it's very loud, noisy, and hot. It's quite easy to put fire out. Unlike earth, you know, mountains is quite hard to get rid of mountains, but a big blaze, I mean, they can destroy everything, but, you know, you can put them out. And water, particularly heavy emotions, puts fire out. And earth puts fire out by dampening down energy. Because what fire needs is enthusiasm. And if they're around depressing people or fighting people, it can wear them down. And then all that energy gets turned inside and they can get depressed, which is not a good sight to see. And then the third element is water, which I think is the strongest element, actually. Water is the phlegmatic temperament. We've got sunlight. Water is the phlegmatic temperament. And water has no boundaries. When you measure the sea, you measure the land masses that are surrounding the sea. When you navigate on water, you navigate using the stars. Because you can't, water is this amorphous mass that you cannot orientate yourself in. And as a consequence, watery people are quite open, unbounded, really not good with boundaries. They can take you over, they can take other people over, they can dissolve into people, they can be dissolved into people. And so they have a sense of exhaustion sometimes because there's so much energy and it cannot be contained and it cannot be put in a certain direction. So, but what water is feeling. The phlegmatic temperament is all about the heart. And it's very hard in our culture, I'm going to move out of the sun, but in Western culture, you know, watery types, phlegmatic types are not valued very much. In the East, it's not the case. I did some teaching last year, and there were people from all over the world, and the people from the East recognized watery types, and they're very valued in the East because you're gentle, you're softly spoken, you're sensitive, you have a spiritual life and all that. Whereas in the West, you're just seen as a bit wet, really, difficult, over emotional. It's not valued. So what the phlegmatics do is they feel a lot. They're very dreamy. They're quite often creative. But they find the world difficult. They find it hard to incarnate into the world. They're not happy in their bodies. And they can be chaotic because they don't really want to be doing, they want to be feeling. So in terms of health, they can be great escapists, basically. They want to sleep, they love to sleep, phlegmatics, and they like to zone out, whether that's with TV or sweets or alcohol or love affairs, but they like to not be where they are. They like to zone out. But they're very strong because the thing about water is it's very adaptable. It adapts itself to whatever vessel contains it. So actually, of all the elements, it's probably the strongest because water wears down mountains, doesn't it? Puts out fire. So it's very strong and it's very subtle. But again, it's hard in our culture to be a watery type because of the sensitivity. And the last one is air, which is the sanguine temperament. And air, we live in an airy culture. Air is all about thought, the mind. It can be quite superficial. So you think about things like Twitter, politicians, newspaper, social media. It's all that buzzy stuff that is meaningless. A lot of it is, and ephemeral, and can be cruel. Because air is not about feeling. Air is about thought. So you can get great dictators who are airy because they've got their ideas. But of course, people don't necessarily fit into their ideas and plans. And so, terrible things can happen at the hands of airy dictators. Charming, witty, fun to be around. They have an ambiguous relationship with the truth because what is truth? And earthy types find airy types particularly hard because earthy types expect the truth to be told. And to them, there is a truth because they're all about everything that can be nailed down and systematized and measured. Whereas an airy type, well, what is truth? There's this perspective, there's that perspective. I felt like this 5 minutes ago, and now I feel like this, and so on. So it's a very Western mindset. And the thing about air is also has no container. And it's the air that we breathe is the air that was around at the time of the Romans or the Greeks or the Egyptians. Air hasn't changed. It absorbs things. So air, for example, will absorb water vapor, clouds, rain, snow, but it doesn't change itself. And air carries things, like it carries sound waves in it, but it doesn't change. It just remains itself. So that's the quality of air and of the sanguine temperament, that they can be very expressive, but things bounce off them. They don't absorb things like water does. And they don't act on things like fire does. Fire will burn things or heat things up, but air just floats past. And that makes them great communicators, lots of teachers and writers. Also negatively gossips and all that superficial stuff we have in our life, is quite airy. But if you want an idea, that's who you go to. If you don't know what to do, an airy person will give you several suggestions about what or do you know this, or do you know that? They're a mine of information. And what they like very much to do is to connect, love to connect people. And they will have people in their lives that they keep in different compartments. And of all the the other temperaments, air is the strongest because it's not connected to anything. And air is warm and moist, and that's how our bodies are. So in terms of temperament and how healthy they are, usually airy types are the healthiest. They don't bash up against things like earth. They don't absorb things like water, and they don't exhaust themselves like fire. They just bounce along. The only problem with air is that they can overdo things. And as completely unlike the melancholic, as they grow older, they find it harder because you can exhaust yourself. You know, they're classic party animals, burning the candle at both ends, spreading themselves really wide. Well, when you get to 50 or so, that's not so easy. That's not so easy. So they can get tired and despondent that their body can't accommodate them anymore.
So how do we determine our, because it's not as simple as looking at our sun sign. How do we determine what our temperament is?
Okay, there's a calculation in the book which I've worked out that basically involves looking at the season you were born in. The 4 seasons of the year relate to the 4 elements. So we have just moved into sanguine, spring, hope, optimism, cheer, energy after the misery of water and winter. So from the spring equinox to midsummer is sanguine. Midsummer to autumn equinox is choleric, hot summer days, those hot days. And then from autumn equinox to winter solstice is melancholic. And that fits because, you know, when September comes, we all buckle down, don't we, to work hard. It's when we start our courses. It's when school starts. It's that time where we take things seriously. And then from winter solstice to spring equinox is phlegmatic. That's when it rains and it snows and you want to hibernate, basically. You don't want to do anything in January, February, and March, really, unless we're lucky and we have an early spring. But mostly people want to sleep, eat carbohydrates, and just keep it very quiet. And that's phlegmatic. So you look at the time that people, the season that people are born in, you look at their ascendant, because what your ascendant shows you is your health. The 6th house in that horoscope shows sickness or predisposition, but your ascendant shows your health, because what your ascendant shows you is how you enter the world, how you have a dialogue with the world. So somebody with Capricorn rising and Saturn on the ascendant goes into the world in a suspicious, pessimistic, sometimes mean-spirited world. They go into the world with that mindset that people aren't to be trusted, that it's all going to go to hell, and a negative pessimistic mindset. And what happens is, of course, if you go into the world that way, the world reflects back to you those things because you only see what you're looking for, I think. So your ascendant will show your health and how you relate to the world. So planets on your ascendant are terribly important. Planets in the 1st house are important. So you take that into consideration and you look at the planet ruling the ascendant. So for example, if you're Leo rising, you would look at the condition of the sun, which rules Leo. Yeah. Because if you've got the sun in Leo and Leo rising, then your health is going to be good, usually. Whereas if you've got the sun in Aquarius and you're Leo rising, might be back issues. There might be issues around Leo Aquarius. So you look at the season, you look at the ascendant, and then you look at the moon sign, and you see whether it's in which of the 4 temperaments it's in, what elements it's in, and its condition. So if your moon is in Cancer, well, that's going to give you a good health, but it will also it will show you that when you do have sickness, it's likely to come from an emotional cause. Cancer is about feeling. So you'd always, if your ill health is shown by water, you'd always look for emotional causes first, because of course your emotions affect your physical body massively. Whereas if you're shown, supposing you're shown by the moon of Aries, chances are you have accidents or bang your head a lot, or anger. And anger really affects the physical body, irritates the liver, besides the obvious thing like accidents and overwork and everything. But it affects the liver, exhausts the liver. So you're more likely to get fevers and rashes and inflammation and so on. So you look at the moon. You also look at the Almuten, which is a calculation you do, and it's the strongest planet in the chart. And the Almuten is not often what you expect it to be, oddly, because it's an Almuten by house. So it's which planet is strongest in which house. I have that on my computer program, so I don't actually work it out manually. And then the last thing is you look at the connection between the moon and the sun. So the phase of the moon. New moons are one thing, full moons are something else, applying to the first quarter and so on. So the phase of the moon will also show your temperament. And basically it's a scoring system. You add up the points and that shows you. If you don't have the ascendant, you can still work it out. You get a pretty good idea talking to people. First of all, you should look like your ascendant. You should look, if you're skinny and hirsute, you do not have Cancer rising. You just don't. If you've got this domey head and a big lot of hair, you're not Aquarius rising. So you can look at people's bodies and make judgments about that. And what do they like to eat? Because the different temperaments, definitely. The food they eat, the way they sleep, work they do, how they conduct themselves, even how they conduct making an appointment with you, so different. The fiery people, they'll just make their minds up like that. They send you an email, you reply, and they make the appointment, and then they pay you straight away. The watery people is sometimes, they make an appointment, then they change it, and they're not sure about this day. And I always say, well, give me some background, and you get screeds of, whereas the fiery people do 3 sentences. So you get an idea of how people are, but the food will tell you quite a lot. And how they dress, really. That shows you a lot, how people dress. So if you don't have the ascendant, you can work it out, really, I think, usually. Yeah.
It just made me laugh as you were talking about how people make appointments. And it's so true. Right away, I thought of an Aries client of mine who makes appointments on the spur of the moment and forgets that my schedule is not clear for her for when she needs it. And it doesn't matter because she kind of goes, oh yeah, okay, so when can we do it? And then we find a time that's suitable for her. Because I have another one who's a Cancerian, and it came to mind also exactly that, the thinking about it, let's, I'll think about it, I'll come back. And then when she arrives, I basically have to listen for the first 45 minutes or so before I can actually say anything, because she needs to get everything off her chest. Yes. And then she looks at me and then we begin. But she has to first get everything off her chest. And it is the way it is, different temperaments. So what I wanted to ask you about today was this issue of food and temperaments, because I find that fascinating. Maybe it's my Taurus interest in food, but I find it really quite something, the thought that different foods suit different temperaments, because we know it's becoming much more recognized that different people suit different types of foods. And it's something to do with gut health and the type of bacteria that you have in your gut as to how you're going to respond to different types of food. So we know that. And now I'm thinking about it in terms of temperament as well. So tell us more about how you see food?
Well, first of all, in terms of digestion, because that's the important thing. You can eat as good food as you like, but if you're not very good at digesting it, then it's going nowhere. Melancholics have the worst digestion, earth people, and they really should eat simple peasant food, warm food. They should not eat cold food. It really doesn't agree with them. That thing about eating raw food and salad, there are very few people in this climate that suits, unless we're in midsummer. So for a melancholic, simple food, nothing oily, nothing too sweet, nothing really complicated, really basic peasant food like vegetables and roots and pulses and stuff. They can't tolerate heavy meats or complicated like French food, that sort of thing. They cannot digest it. And they also not good with alcohol either. Not good with alcohol. They need, because the melancholic is cold and dry and they always need fluids. They always need fluids. And they hate drinking fluids. So you have to really encourage them to drink a lot of water or herbal teas or fluids, because what happens with the melancholic body is they get stuck. You get when things are dry, what do? It slows down. So you get growth, or you get blockages, or you get outgrowths. And so for a melancholic, you always need to keep that kind of fluidity moving, get everything moving. So they're the worst, really. But there are also people you might find with melancholics, they have issues around food. Because the thing, for example, anorexia, it's often a melancholic thing because it's about control, amongst other things. And not wanting to grow up sometimes. And just starving yourself seems to be a very melancholic thing, because melancholics have quite an ambivalent relationship with the physical body. They're not that happy with it. I'm thinking particularly of Virgos and Capricorns, Taurus less so. But they don't value the body, or they find it a bit gross, those two signs in particular. And so if you're giving advice about diet to melancholics, watch it. You don't want people to get into that orthorexia, I think it's called, where they get obsessed with, you don't want to go to that place with them. So you have to be quite skillful. The opposite is true for Taurus, is they can be a bit greedy and they like their food. But they like their food natural. Lots and lots of foragers I know are Taurians. They like that. And that economy that you pick your food from the waysides and the forests and the seashores and stuff. But Taurus, because it's ruled by Venus, has to watch the sweets, likes its cake. And it's okay, but as you get older again, you have to watch the cake. And they don't have a great digestion. Next, fire, the cholerics. Because they've got super high metabolism, they can eat everything, and they shouldn't be fasting. Fasting's not good for them, because it just makes them even speedier and faster. So they should eat things that are slightly cooling. They're the people that would be good to eat salads and juices, cool stuff. And again, lots and lots of water to cool them down, because they overheat. They rarely take advice. The cholerics is rare. So also they have a fondness for fire, water, alcohol, quite like hallucinogens, all those dangerous stuff. They like dangerous stuff. Chili, curries, all of that stuff they like, but it's not great. It's not great because they get overheated. And choleric kind of conditions are things like heart attacks, strokes, big bad accidents, it's like dramatic illnesses, which, can kill you from time to time. So they don't get slow developing illnesses. They get things that go bang. And then maybe as a choleric person, they're quite happy to go that way, and that may also be true. But if they're coming to you for advice, just to cool them down, calm them down, moisturize them, fill them full of fluids, and slow them down. They are fine on meat, though. Quite often cholerics need to eat meat, especially red meat. I mean, not everybody can do without meat. Not everybody can be vegan or vegetarian. And I think cholerics need that. It could be good meat. It doesn't have to be bad meat, but that intense, dense, nutrient-dense food, like steak or something, is quite interesting to them. And it is quite good because particularly if they're physically very active, they just have to watch the harmful substances. And then phlegmatics, they are cold and wet temperamentally, and they love to eat too, but they eat for different reasons. I think Taurines eat because they like that mouth food, you know, the taste, the sensation of eating, and they like it in their body. Whereas phlegmatics want to numb themselves usually when they're into eating. And they certainly, the very, very big people that you see, particularly in America, those big people, they're phlegmatics. They're sort of lumbering, slow, sleep a lot, quite passive. Because what things like sugar and refined foods do is they are sedatives. If you eat a lot of sugar, you just dull the edges, don't you? And the other thing that phlegmatics like is alcohol. They like marijuana too, those kind of sort of gentle numbing substances. So for phlegmatics, you have to tell them to eat less, and they don't like that. What I always do for phlegmatics is get them to eat things like, or have ginger in their diet and onions, and try and have a little bit of garlic, so they just heat their body up a bit. And honestly, try and avoid things like sugar and dairy, white bread, which are all very phlegmatic foods, because they're mucus. Anything that's mucus producing is phlegmatic. And they're dulling to the emotions in the body. They don't have a great digestion either. They're a bit like melancholics, phlegmatics. But unlike melancholics, they're not into control. The melancholics will control their food because they know they can't digest it very well. Whereas phlegmatics won't. They like to eat a lot. And obviously weight gain is a problem. And also eating synthetic food or highly chemical food is bad for them. Sugar is bad. So an ideal diet for a phlegmatic is to do that thing where you do fasting. So you have a 14 hours or 12 or 14 hours between your last meal and your first meal. If you can do 16 hours, even better. Just have the eating time, a short time during your day, and try and keep it dense food, like nutrient-rich food, so to help the digestive process. And you have to walk away from sugar, you just do, and that's hard. But, you know, it's bad stuff. And you probably know all the stuff about insulin resistance is cause of many, many chronic diseases. They think you've not just diabetes, but heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer, arthritis. So many conditions are triggered by insulin resistance. And that comes about when you're constantly eating foods that are high in sugar, because then you're constantly secreting insulin, your body is, and at some point it just exhausts itself and overcompensate. So, and dairy is not good either because that's cold and wet. So again, if they want a cheesy thing, then it's more like feta cheese or halloumi or something like that rather than just dairy. And with phlegmatics, you need to get them to exercise, which again is quite a task. What I suggest to them is dance, because it's beautiful. You do it with someone else and it's not sort of sweaty, and it's not like the stuff that we were forced to do at school, which was humiliating and boring. And, you know, ugly. So dance, if you can get them to dance, or gentle kind of yoga, like yin yoga or something like that. But to get that movement, because movement heats up the body, and what the digestion needs is heat. If you're too cold, you don't digest. So you get that sort of bloating and oddly craving of food at the same time. Last one is the sanguine. And as I said earlier, they're warm and moist, which is the temperature of the body, and they can get away with a lot. They're generally quite robust, things bounce off them, they can eat what they like, their body's quite happy with anything. But as they grow older, the overindulgence gets to them because the organ that is the sanguine organ is the liver. And the liver is, as you know, is the organ that does all the detoxing in the body. And after, 30, 40 years, it gets tired. Sanguines love to party, and they love all the wine and the cigarettes and the barbecues and all of those things. But as they grow older, it will be harder. But younger, they are really robust, and they usually don't get ill. Bounces off them. So they can eat whatever they like, basically.
There was something that struck me as a little bit confusing or a bit of a contradiction. And that is how the signs, the elements that the signs belong to, don't always tally with the temperament of the season. So, for example, Taurus, as an earth sign, would be melancholic, but it's a spring sign, which should be choleric. So how do we navigate through these contradictions?
I think it's a question of, in terms of working out your temperament, you work out which bit predominates. There might be more Taurus, or there might be more springtime, which is sanguine. You'd have to do a calculation and work out which predominates. Certainly, if you use Taurus as an example, yes, it is an earth sign, but we're in Taurus season now, and it's very light and airy and beautiful. So it's not like Virgo, and it's not like Capricorn. So it's a very different expression of Earth. But yes, it is the case that doesn't work. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I think that for me, the seasons work. I certainly, obviously, summer would be fire. And I think spring is air because of the way everything suddenly, literally, I think for me in London, last weekend, everything burst out suddenly after weeks of rain and cloud and everything. Suddenly you get this sense that spring is here. And that's a very sanguine expression because there's expansion, everyone's smiling, they're all outside and everyone's happy and we're all relieved and hopeful. And like I said, the thing about melancholic in the autumn, I just think that we do those things in the autumn. We do buckle down, don't we? It's a serious time.
Yes. In fact, I said choleric, I meant to say sanguine, but you can see that in a sense with the fact that, it's such an optimistic time, spring. So, you're full of ideas, and it's a time when I always say as a gardener that it's such a hopeful time because nothing's gone wrong yet. The aphids haven't taken over yet. And if you put your broad beans in really early, the black fly, you might just avoid before the beans begin to set. So spring is this time when nothing's yet gone wrong. It's just perfect. And I think that is very, very sanguine, very air.
So it is, and it's very sort of warm and moist. The moisture makes the plant grow, doesn't it? And it's warm because eventually the sun comes out and it starts to heat up the earth. Yeah, very much so. And because sanguine is about hope. That's the emotion that goes with it, hope. And that's what you do when you plant your broad beans or whatever, or you see the blossom on the trees. You feel like, oh, this is, and you make plans and you get excited about the year. And it's like what you've come out of is the hibernation of phlegmatic time, where the seeds were germinating, we just didn't see them. And that's a very phlegmatic thing because they like to sleep, but their dream life is incredibly powerful. And they're deep, deep people. And that's what you do in winter, isn't it? You sleep a lot, you eat a lot, and you think and work out and feel out what you want to be doing this year. So
Well,
there's not much going on the surface, is there? But it's all going on underneath.
it is the time to dream, certainly, winter time, where a spring is more about action and getting those plans in. So yes, I do like that. And of course, in your book, you do describe the scoring system. So, you know, people can really begin to get head around this. Elisabeth, what a fascinating insight into our natures you've given us. And I would remind everyone that the book that we are talking about is called Traditional Western Herbal Medicine. And here it is. And I will be, don't want to disappear behind the book. I will be putting a link to this in the description box. And if people want to find out more about you, your courses, your work, where do they go, Elisabeth?
My website is elisabethbrooke.com, and Elisabeth is spelled with an S. I also do lots of posting on Instagram, which is elizabeth.cl.brooke at Instagram. That's my two main social medias. I do lots of teaching all over the place.
Yes, you do. You're a busy bee.
I am. I'm a mixture of sanguine and melancholic. So that's why I love to teach. Sanguines love to teach, but also melancholics write books. You couldn't possibly write a book unless you had some melancholy in there, because you've got to sit at the table, plan it. Very melancholic.
Well, I'm all the more grateful, given how busy you are, that you made the time to speak to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, Anna. I've had so much fun. It's great to speak.
And thank you all for watching. Do remember to check out my own website. I've got more courses coming up, and hopefully I'll be able to see you at one of them. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.